Hi, everyone. Welcome to Doing Sociology. Today, we have a very special discussion on the role of professional bodies in the development of sociology. And we are very honored to be joined by Professor Bandana Purkayastha, Professor Geoffrey Pleyers, Professor Joya Misra, and Professor Matri Chaudhary. Although all of these four speakers do not need elaborate introductions, I'm just going to very quickly introduce each one of them. Professor Purkayastha is the Vice President for National Associations in the International Sociological Association, ISA. She is a Board of Trustees Distinguished Professor at the University of Connecticut with a joint appointment in Sociology and Asian American Studies. Professor Geoffrey Pleyers is an F.R.S-FNRS researcher and professor of sociology at the University of Louvain, Belgium. He is the current president of the International Sociological Association, ISA. Joya Misra is Provost Professor and Roy Z. Zuckerberg Endowed Leadership Chair at the University of Massachusetts, where she is jointly appointed in Sociology and Public Policy. She is currently the President of the American Sociological Association, ASA. Matri Chaudhary is a former Professor of Sociology at the Center for the Study of Social Systems, CSSS, Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU. She is also one of the co-founders of Doing Sociology. I welcome all of you to this discussion and really glad that we can have this, albeit from different time zones. So to begin the discussion, Professor Pleyers, if I may ask you about the role of the International Sociological Association in promoting sociological knowledge at this very crucial juncture for global sociology, what would your response be?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for welcoming us in this very insightful program. That's obviously a broad and very important question. The International Sociological Association accounts with over 5,000 members all over the world, but especially with 83 national associations. So for us, definitely, it's so important to see the global sociology as a global community. And what brings us together is the conviction that sociology has a major role to play in our time, and especially in contributing to solve the challenges of the 21st century. Climate change, the need for different relationship with nature, defense of democracy in a more tolerant world, fair distribution of resources, and a rising consciousness of globality. These are issues that during too long we sociologists discussed mostly, not only, but mostly in the global north. I would rather say that it was mostly diffused. Sociologists based in the global north, or from the global north, were the one who were mostly well known about all these topics. Today, global sociology is very different. When we think about global sociology today, it's not about extending sociology from global north. It's all the opposite. It's questioning the Eurocentric perspective, questioning sociology. This was made without too many people. And once we unveil this different sociology, we see that sociology has so many things to bring from all these challenges when we consider our colleagues, but also the perspective from actors, the approaches from different parts of the global south. So our aim is really to bring it all together. And if we look at, for example, climate change, we see that sociologists from Latin America, sociologists from India, I think, for example, you can find Ashish Kothari and many others. They have actually so many things to teach us globally, not only to understand how to solve the challenges in their own countries, their region, but globally too. And this is definitely the aim of the ISA, of our associations, to bring these sociologists together, to invite us all to see challenges differently, to bring not only the analysis but also possible solutions to the challenges of the 21st centuries from different places. And this is a challenge not only at the ISA in our large meeting, but also in our daily life through social media, publication, and meetings to invite us to see the world and global sociology differently.
Thank you for that response. Professor Purkayastha, our next question is to you. You have been part of several executive as well as research committees of both the American Sociological Association and the International Sociological Association. How do you see these smaller committees playing their part in promoting sociology?
Thank you for that question, and thank you all for inviting me. Geoffrey just said that when we are together, working together, we learn to think differently. And that's the theme I want to pick up and really emphasize, that it is in the smaller committees when we have much more of a chance to talk face to face, actually have meaningful conversations, and learn to trust each other, that we can then collaborate on other issues to actually collectively work on those larger problems, whatever they might be. In other words, as sociologists, we all come with passions, but we are not going to just act on those passions as individuals in larger committees, though that could happen. So the building blocks, I think, are smaller committees. The networks are important. The relationships are important. The possibilities of collaborating down the road are important. And I'll give you one example of that. But I just wanted to, before I give you the example, emphasize that what we're trying to do really centrally is address knowledge hierarchies. That working together needs to have that as a central focus. And particularly for people like myself in the North, be willing to understand where and how my own work could be irrelevant to people in other parts of the world. Here's an example of small committees coming together. So I belong to the ASA, and many people like myself who work on gender issues broadly belong to smaller research committees like sex and gender, or the race and ethnic focus research groups, and so on. Sociologists for Women in Society, which is the feminist sociologist group, also the focus is gender. And I belong to ISA RC32, which is Women and Gender in Society. Well, for many years, SWS has been publishing a flagship journal, Gender in Society, for which Joya was one of the leading editors to make it global. But we convinced SAGE, for several years, SAGE is the publisher of Gender in Society, to fund the reception for RC32 at ISA meetings. That brought a lot of sociologists, all united on the broader issue of gender together, and we got to know more people. So when SWS began to form its very successful program with global partnerships, all we had to do was one email and ask, okay, who would you recommend from such and such country? So that's 3 organizations coming together through the efforts of actually smaller committees. So that's my answer to where and how smaller committees can be very, very effective. I'll end there.
Thank you so much for that insightful response. Professor Misra, Professor Purkayastha was talking about, shared knowledge and breaking down those hierarchies. So as the president of the ASA, do you think that the association can play a role in bridging the gap between the North and the South?
That's such a good question. And I'm the child of immigrants. My father came from India, my mother came from Switzerland. And so I've always kind of had a more global perspective, really trying to understand things, not just based on what people in the United States are thinking. So it's very important to me that this is a goal. And I do think that there have been a number of recent ASA presidents who have really committed to this. That said, I think that there's a history of the American Sociological Association as being somewhat parochial, somewhat U.S. focused. That is really, it's a challenge to get over that. I've invited a number of people to come to the meeting that will be mine in Montreal in 2024 from different parts of the world, and most of them have said, no, thank you, because they've had this experience where ASA has not felt very welcoming in the past. So I do think, this is something that is critically important. I do not believe that we can think as sociologists based on only what people in the US are thinking. I think it's a much too narrow perspective. I think sociologists around the globe are making incredibly important insights and often are more engaged in their local communities and in solving societal problems than many sociologists in the United States are. I really feel like we have to be learning from that. But I also think that there's been a kind of a problem of communication And I definitely think ISA, and like I'm a part of RC19, and I've learned everything I know about the welfare state from the scholars from around the globe who are part of RC19. But I do think that, you know, ASA still has work to do in terms of really making itself a place that is deeply engaged with the insights from people around the world and making everybody feel welcome in that space, and, you know, helping to create community across borders. That's a long-term project.
Right. Thank you for that response, Professor Misra. Professor Chaudhary, now coming to in the Indian context, you know, we have the Indian Sociological Society. What is its specificity, and do you think that the ISS can play a role in the decolonial turn? You have been associated with the ISS, and you're also part of the editorial board of its journal, the Bulletin. So just curious as to how do you see the decolonial turn? Or the
I was sort of listening with interest to what Professor Misra was saying about the American Sociological Association. So it's a contrast because in the Indian Sociological Society, obviously the hierarchies get reversed about who has credibility. So if you come from the global north, you immediately acquire a certain kind of privilege, just by being from the global north. So when we say that what role we could have in decoloniality, we also have a specificity of our history where some of our finer academics have not been necessarily associated with the profession. So there has been a kind of disjunction between active sociologists academically and the people who are in the profession. The third point, which is historically specific in our context, we lack a sense of professionalism. That's a long history of colonial modernity. Even our state-citizen relationship is more about client patronage, and that gets reproduced within the associations. So there's a large task, and so it is actually the content of sociological analysis of how our professional associations take place. So one of the central tasks that I visualize is that we have enough work writings and activities in our part of the world which could help in talking back, so to say, or the decolonial turn, but that does not necessarily have a kind of centralized voice through which the Indian Sociological Society speaks from. The last point is that in the current context, the decolonial turn has been appropriated by a certain kind of authoritarian impulses in our country. And I think we have to distinguish between that kind of framing of decoloniality and a more progressive understanding of decoloniality. Thank you. Yeah. So that's it, Deepali. Yeah.
Yes, Professor Pleyers, coming back to you, working with the ISA as president now, how do you plan to democratize the ISA as a space, particularly with reference to the global south?
I think on this topic, actually, the Professor Chaudhary already said some crucial issues. It's about democratizing. It's about getting more members from the global south, but also about including them in a more active way. And this is not something that we have to do for the global south. This is something that we all need to do to better understand our world. We need more insights, in particular from India. India is not any country. It's a most populated country, so important in sociology. We need more sociologists from India in ISA, and mostly not just for us to understand the world better, because there are so many important insights there that have been invisibilized for too long. Of course, we all know some very famous, important Indian sociologists, but as soon as we go back to our research committees, to any topic, there are many sociologists from India that we don't know, and who would help us to better understand our own research topics. So this is our aim, to see how, not only to get more members, but to have them more actively included. I would say it mostly from India. This is a very big part, but we try to do so also in different continents. And I would say that we still have a long way to go. But this has been the aim of the ISA, at least for the last 3-4 decades, at least since Immanuel Wallerstein, and most probably forever in our association, ever since he was created in the late 1940s. And for that, it's not easy, because it's easy to say we need more members, but to promote a climate that is where you can have this kind of intercultural encounter, it requires many things. It requires, of course, to be affordable. I think we are affordable. ISA costs $10.5 a year for Indian professor. So it's not only a matter of cost, it's a matter of opening spaces. We try to do it in every set of our association. For example, our editors. All our editors come from the Global South today, all of them, 5 of them. And we have workshops to help scholars, not only young scholar, but particularly young scholar, but also senior ones, to write in the way that is needed to be published in top journals. We also have a way in our social media to promote much more journals and publications from the Global South. Together with Bandana, we are also very keen on reaching out to national association in the Global South. She's very active in notably in Africa. I'm right now today in Latin America. We want to be closely involved also to support the Indian Association, but it's the same also in our research committees. Many committees, we need more sociologists from India, but they're already there present. We need to support them, but especially we need not to consider that it's enough to have scholars from Global South within our members. We need them actively involved in our debates. And this transforms the way we see the world, we see sociology. Let me give you one short example from Latin America. If you see sociology from Latin America, you also consider a different relationship between actors and sociologists. You don't consider sociologists in the academia and the actors just who act a bit. No, of course, actors think and transform society and transform the way we see the world. You wouldn't have the same meaning of ecology in Western Europe without indigenous movements in Latin America, with a sense of good life when we to live in a without against a hyper-consumerist society. And then you go to India and you read Ashish Kothari or many other people, colleagues from India, and you see that they also develop that. It's just that, and we need all that to think the world differently. One of the main challenges of our century is to live together on a limited planet. And on this perspective, India in particular, but also I would say Latin America and Africa have many insights to bring. You also then realize that most of our concepts, many of our main concepts haven't been created in the academia, but outside of it. This is true in the Global South, but also in Global North. Take the intersectionality, a very good example. So by looking at sociology, by learning from sociologists in the Global South, we also learn to transform sociology where we are and to look at this concept differently, to look at a different relationship with the actors that are also producers of knowledge, of concepts that are very much needed for us to understand our world. So the challenge is about inclusion is not only about opening membership. It goes much, that's such a small, I would say, easier step. We need to go much beyond that. I think we are going in the right direction, but there's still a lot of many things that needs to be done. And of course, that's why we need much more Indian sociologists and much more actively involved in our research committees, in our national associations, and in our whole International Sociological Association.
Thank you, Professor Pleyers. Professor Misra, connecting to what Professor Pleyers was saying, and I know you've written on this, public sociology. So how do you see the future of that and the ASI's role in it?
I mean, I think that in order to create a better world, we have to be doing public sociology. And not just public sociology, that can be read in many different ways, but community engaged sociology, participatory research sociology, it has to be actually with communities solving problems, right? So Ashish Kothari's name has come up a few different times, but that's right, like that's the kind of sociology that actually is making a difference in the world. And I think that is the critical work of the 21st century. I have seen over the course of the 20th century in the United States, there was this kind of constant back and forth between we have to be a science and where our goal is to help, right? Our goal is to address social problems, not just identify them. what has happened in the 21st century, and this is very much due to Michael Buravoy's work, is that public sociology has been much more embraced in this country. So it had already been embraced in different parts of the world, but it became more embraced in the United States. And I'm happy and excited about that, but I think there have to be much more pushing to really make sure that we are valuing that work when we are assessing academics, for promotion or for tenure or things like that. I think that it's still kind of seen as this additional work on top instead of the central work that we are doing as sociologists. And I want to kind of place it more central. And I do feel like this is work where I am learning so much from my colleagues in many different parts of the world, certainly in the global South, how to work with communities in ways that are not extractive, in ways that are actually, solidaristic. And that's my goal. That's where I want to see sociology going.
Thank you, Professor Misra. Professor Chaudhary, do you think that the digital can play a big role in transforming how we understand the relationship between professional bodies and sociology?
Yeah, so here that we are on the platform of doing sociology, we are ourselves a little surprised by the reach that it has had. We had not anticipated that we could actually reach out to such a wide variety of people. So I think we have no option, but because it's not a matter of choice, that we have to embrace the digital platforms for discussing such issues. It enables the kind of questions which were raised by both Professor Pleyers and Professor Misra and Professor Purkayastha, the question that we may not be face to face in the literal sense of the term, but we're interacting. And a lot of the understanding which emerges from this kind of dialogic situations are fundamentally different, So I think it has a role, but it cannot be in isolation from other face-to-face interactions, Nor can it be divested of a more critical perspective, which looks at the digital in a more critical fashion. This is particularly true in the context of India, where we have perhaps an unprecedented use of, say, WhatsApp, which as far as I know, is not so widely used in the global north. So the social media has very often been used in a detrimental fashion, and we require within the curriculum a kind of critical analysis of how do we read the mediatized form? How do we understand or diagnose in a more ordinary sense fake news, for example? Because we've always had more convergence between what we see as common sense sociology and academic sociology in our parts, but the role of the digital has made it even more dangerous in some senses. So we have to be aware of its limits and yet be able to use it in a fashion which can be more productive. I just wanted to bring in a point which Professor Misra mentioned, which I was really struck by, the question of solidarity and community, building sociology, and whether we could use those criteria for assessment, for when we evaluate. Because it's in the small nitty-gritty details where some of these transformations, which are larger, can actually be reproduced, So thank you for that. I sort of really would like to think about those lines.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Chaudhary. I think Professor Purkayastha also mentioned sharing knowledges. So going back to you, Professor Purkayastha, how do you think we can think as well as act in terms of both promoting and advancing a global and public sociology through professional associations?
Thank you for that question. And having Geoffrey Pleyers and Moitre Chaudhary and Joya Misra talk before me, in a way makes my task easier because I'll draw on some of the things they said. So I want to begin by saying the task of professional associations has to be about academics. And I'm saying this even though it seems like redundant, because it has to be about academics and some fundamental critical standards that we expect people to reach, because what we are fending off, as Professor Chaudhary mentioned, is, that entire industry that is growing, which is circulating incomplete or, deliberate disinformation, against whom we are trying to defend anything we say or do. That's really important. And so for professional associations to be very deliberate about our focus, what are our standards, and so on, so that if we are using, digital platforms, and I absolutely think we should, we are clear about how we are different and building the solidarities around that. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is that the digital platforms actually provide access in a way that we can't always provide access. On the one hand, within ISA, and like Geoffrey said, he's been traveling and promoting, the sociological enterprise all over in the US we would call Latin America, and other members are doing that in other parts of the world. But there are fundamental resource challenges. That is, anybody can write anything, right? Who can access it? Who can read it? And, again, there are industries with profit-making industries with paywalls and so on. How do our ideas circulate? So professional associations that pay really deliberate attention to what are the good ways in which we can share knowledge in a way that can be accessed for teaching particularly. The person in a remote part of the world, and I have former students who are in countries who will always tell me that, I don't have library privileges like you do, so I'm not able to read these things. I can't actually teach from these things. So what else are we doing? Which is why, by the way, I think digital sociology that y'all are doing is absolutely the leading edge. So the access question is important, the academic focus access question. But along with that, whatever we're producing needs to be relevant. That's the other part of professional associations. Like if we are not producing things that are relevant, that are said in language beyond our jargon, it kind of doesn't exist any longer because other people are talking about those in the language that people can understand, and people will naturally read those things instead of what we are saying. So that relevance part is really, really important. And then I think the other thing, and I'll leave it at this last question, that sociologies are beleaguered in many countries. I mean, as vice president of national associations, we have 73 national association members, though our general membership come from close to 130 countries, right? So it's sort of, leading the 73 national associations and another 45 regional and affiliated associations. There are politics, there are national enmities between the countries and from which our members come. There are all of these realities, and there's growing authoritarianism in many countries or in pockets of countries where, frankly, things like sociology are very bad news because we are teaching the critical whatever it is. So professional associations have to be deliberate about thinking through how can we present that solid front. I mean, this analogy I used before, but I'll use it again. If we are individual branches, we can be cut off very quickly. But if we are a bundle, we are harder to break. So what professional associations ought to be doing as a central focus is to build the bundles. And that bundles rest on all of these other things, our differences across languages, our social positions, and so on and so forth. And none of these tasks are easy, but I think if we don't have that as our central vision, not simply the role of our professional associations, but I think our disciplines will start becoming irrelevant because there are so many headwinds pitted against us to try and cut down our relevance. So I'll stop right there.
thank you, Professor Purkayastha, and thank you to all our speakers. We've come, towards the end of our discussion. But before we sign off, would you like to give any closing remarks, Professor Pleyers?
No, just thank you for bringing us together. I think this was we see that there are a lot of converging issues that we have to work on. And we also see that the way is still long. I fully agree with what everyone said, but last in Bandana, we in our work as academics, we really have a very strong responsibility today in a world that is changing fast, but also with different social media. We just, first of all, we have to be good sociologists and to also understand our responsibility, on which I totally share Professor Misra perspective, that it's also a responsibility towards the community, locally and globally. And in this perspective, we need a social media. I mean, Professor Duri has made a very strong claim about that. We take the space to occupy it, but also we need strong and good analysis, which we do much better together with perspective from different continents.
Thank you. Professor Misra, would you like to add any final comments?
I just really enjoy this opportunity to learn from all of you and to have this conversation. And I really look forward to many more similar conversations in the years ahead.
Thank you. And Professor Purkayastha, Professor Chaudhary.
Well, I'm just going to say thank you. I've admired this platform, and I admire the many opportunities the three of you are creating in, just to enable us to talk. And all the content that you are creating on digital sociology that, all of us are able to use. That, I think, encapsulates many of the points that I was trying to make, for sure. So thank you very much.
Professor Chaudhary, some final comments.
Thank you again. Thank you so much, that all of you so readily agreed to be on this platform. And like Bandana says, let's look forward to many more such conversations. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you to all our speakers for joining us from different time zones. And thank you for joining us for this discussion. And I think we had a lot of things to take away from the discussion, but something which resonated with me a lot is to democratize knowledge. And I think, professional bodies have a very important role there to play, not only to promote the discipline, but to bring in people together, strengthen research committees, and through that also do sociology with the community. So thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.